Well, thank you very, very much. I can't express my feeling of gratitude for your honoring me with this achievement award. And my thanks go to Joe Rocco, and my thanks go to all of you associated with the Rhode Island Italian American Hall of Fame. And I also want to congratulate all of you for the other honorees that you have honored today and for the scholarships that you've provided. One thing my parents always wanted to make clear to us is that we should always be proud of being Italian. And the reason is because as Italian Americans, we believe deeply in what this country is all about and the great opportunity that it has provided people from across this world. But people that you have honored in sports, in the military, in politics, in business, in labor, all represent the heart and soul of what Italian Americans are all about. They give back to this country and they make a contribution to the greatest democracy on the face of the earth. I'm honored to be here because I'm in Providence, and I've had a great relationship here in Providence, working with your congressional delegations, in particular, working with people like Jack Reed. You ought to be very proud of Jack Reed. He is a dedicated public servant. And, you know, a lot of concern about the dysfunction in Washington these days. And I pray that ultimately there will be more Jack Reeds in the Congress of the United States who are committed to making this country work. Work with Jack, work with Sheldon Whitehouse on the Intelligence Committee, with Jim, Congressman Jim, who's been a great supporter as well in the Congress. Work with many here in Rhode Island, particularly those who are involved in supporting our military. Rhode Island, by virtue of some very important defense industries, has been essential to protecting our national security. And beyond that, you have men and women in the military who have made a tremendous contribution to the security of our country. And I want to thank Rhode Island for the men and women who have served this country, many of whom gave their lives, because they, through their blood, have protected our country and protected our democracy for ourselves and for our children. So please give all of them a great hand if you could. Most of all, I'm honored because we're Italians here. I speak to a lot of audiences, but I never have had the opportunity to be before an audience that I consider family. Most of you are my family. I'm the son of Italian immigrants. My parents, both of them, came here from Calabria. And I'm glad that there are a few Calabresi in the audience, because we're all testaduras, which means hard heads. And that's the way we've survived, very frankly. My father was the 13th in his family. And as Jack pointed out, he had several brothers who came over ahead of him. His older brother, Bruno, who went to Sheridan, Wyoming. He had another brother, Tony, who went to California. And so, as was the tradition when they came here, you visit your older brother first. So they did. They went to Wyoming. They spent one winter in Sheridan, Wyoming. And my mother said, it's time to visit your other brother in California, which they did. My dad, thank God, made it to Monterey, California. Started a restaurant during the war years. Monterey was jumping town. Big Italian population in Monterey, a lot of them involved in fishing. A lot of sardines were being caught. Cannery Row, Steinbeck's Cannery Row, developed during that period. But we also had Fort Ord, which was a military training post that was training the men and women from across this country who were going to World War II. And so Monterey was their last stop with civilization. My dad had a restaurant in downtown. We used to invite some of those soldiers to our home for the holidays. And my dad was the chef. My mother handled the cash register. My brother and I worked in the back. My earliest recollections were standing on a chair in the back of that restaurant washing glasses. My parents believed child labor was a requirement in our family. When he sold the restaurant, he moved to Carmel Valley nearby, bought some land, and planted a walnut orchard. And again, you're part of an Italian family, you work. And so my brother and I were working and planted the walnut orchard, did the irrigation, did the hoeing, did the pruning, all the things you do. As those trees grew taller, my father used to go around in those days with a pole and hook and shake each of the branches. And my brother and I used to be underneath collecting the walnuts. When I got elected to Congress, my father said, you know, you've been well trained to go to Washington because you've been dodging nuts all your life. It's true. I used to ask my father. Jack mentioned he came in this ship and came all of that distance to this country, and I used to ask him, why did you do that? Because I know Calabria was poor, but you had family, you had everybody you knew. To suddenly pick up and leave and go 3,000 miles to a strange land, why would you do that? And I never forgot what my father said. He said, your mother and I believed we could give our children a better life in this country. And that is the American dream. It's what my wife and I want for our 3 boys and for their families. And it's what all of us want, is to make sure that our children have a better life. That's the dream. Well, my parents also taught me that dreams are just dreams unless you work for it. You got to roll up your sleeves. Nobody's going to hand you anything. You got to sacrifice. You got to be willing to take risks. You got to be willing to be committed, to be dedicated, to fight, to make sure that your dreams come true. And in many ways, those are the values that I was raised with. But those are the values that are part of what this country's all about. Whether it was our forefathers, whether it was the pioneers, whether it was immigrants, the reality is there are some fundamental values that made this the greatest country on earth. And leadership in this country has to reflect those values if we're going to protect the greatest country on earth. This is a challenging time. Let's not kid anybody. This is a challenging time. We've got some tremendous issues that we're dealing with at home and abroad. I've never, in 50 years, seen so many flashpoints in the world that we live in that could turn into a major conflict of some kind. This is a challenging time. And I think this country could go in one of two directions. I honestly believe that in the 21st century, we could be an American Renaissance. This is a great country. We've got great elements that make up our economy in this country. Tremendous innovation, tremendous creativity. We could teach our kids the skills for the 21st century. We could develop the ability to govern, to make decisions, to do what's necessary. We could have a strong and agile defense force that could support world leadership in a very troubled world. We could have that kind of America. Or we could be an America in decline. If we're a country that faces crisis after crisis after crisis, if we're dysfunctional and can't govern ourselves, if we're divided with our prejudices and our hates, then like the empires throughout history, we'll largely just spin out of control and decline. What path we take will be determined by the quality of leadership that we have. I tell the students at the Panetta Institute, my wife and I established that institute, try to inspire young people to get involved in public service. And I tell them, in a democracy, we govern either by leadership or by crisis. If leadership is there and willing to take the risks associated with leadership, make no mistake about it, if you're going to be a leader, you got to take risks. If you're willing to take risks, then we can avoid crisis. But if leaders are not willing to lead, then we'll govern by crisis. And too often we govern by crisis today. Now, I believe in American leadership. I've seen Washington at its best and Washington at its worst. But the good news is I've seen Washington work. And I've seen people who are willing to work together. And I also believe that the greatest strength of this country lies in its people, lies in the people in this room. Because you have those values of common sense, of dedication to country, that willingness to fight, that willingness to make those dreams come true. And that really is at the heart and soul of what makes this country great. And I've seen it. As Secretary of Defense, I saw it in the men and women in uniform that serve this country. These are young men and women who are willing to fight and die for this country. Fight and die for this country. I've looked into their eyes. I've been to the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan, North Africa. And I've looked into their eyes. And they are willing to fight and die for this country. And I'll tell you something, if they're willing to fight and die for this country, it isn't too much to ask our elected leaders to use a little bit of that courage in order to govern this country. In the end, In the end, ladies and gentlemen, this is about a willingness to fight for what we believe in and what's right for our country. I had a Jesuit who taught me at Santa Clara University, where I went to undergrad and law school. And he said, Leon, God gave you life, but it's up to you to make a life. And he told a story that I often tell because it makes a wonderful point of the rabbi and the priest who decided they would get to know each other a little better. And they were going to events, and they decided to go to a boxing match because they thought if they went to events they would talk and learn about each other's religion. So they go to this boxing match. And just before the bell rings, one of the boxers makes the sign of the cross. And the rabbi nudged the priest and he said, "What does that mean?" The priest said, "It doesn't mean a damn thing if he can't fight." Now, we bless ourselves with the hope that everything's going to be fine in this wonderful country of ours. But frankly, it doesn't mean a damn thing unless we're willing to fight for it. And if we are willing to fight for it, if we're willing to follow the example of those who are willing to put on a uniform and fight for this country, if we're willing to fight for it, then we can protect the American dream that my parents cared about and that all of you care about. We can make this an American Renaissance. And most importantly, we can protect a government of, by, and for all people. God bless you. God bless our country. Grazie tanto. Auguri a tutti.